Start there. Okay, so before lunch, we were told, okay, here's a parallelogram. This is what we know about parallelograms. One thing is opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles, supplementary. Diagonals do what to each other? Diagonals bisect each other. Those are the things that you need to know about parallelograms. Now we'll be given stuff like here's a quadrilateral where the diagonals bisect each other. Is it a parallelogram? And the answer is yes. Okay, so they'll go in the reverse. They'll give us a quadrilateral, then they'll ask whether or not it's a parallelogram. Now, here I have a quadrilateral with opposite sides that are congruent. Okay, because the opposite sides are congruent, does that make it a parallelogram? Well, yes, because if this angle is congruent to this angle, that means this line's parallel to this line. And if this angle is congruent to this angle, that means this line is parallel to this line, and thus I have a parallelogram. Okay? All right. So, if we have opposite sides that are congruent, then we have a parallelogram. Here, I'm told that this angle is supplementary to this angle, and this angle is also supplementary to this angle. Is that enough to say that that's a parallelogram? Well, if these are supplementary, that makes these parallel. And if these are supplementary, that makes these parallel. Is that enough to say it's a parallelogram? Yep, when all four sides, when you have two pairs of opposite sides that are parallel, it's a parallelogram. So then here's theorem 6.8. If consecutive angles are supplementary, then it's a parallelogram. Theorem 6.9, if opposite angles are congruent, it's a parallelogram. So if opposite sides are congruent, it's a parallelogram. If opposite angles are congruent, it's a parallelogram. If consecutive angles are supplementary, it's a parallelogram. Now here, what are the values of R and S that'll make it a parallelogram? Well, what do we know about opposite sides? They have to be congruent. So what do we do with the 4R plus 7 and the 7R plus 1? Set them equal to each other. 4R plus 7 equals 7R plus 1. How do I solve that? First step to solve that, Tyler. What would you do if 4R plus 7 equals 7R plus 1? Subtract what? I wouldn't subtract 7. 4R. Not just 4, but 4R. You try to move the variables first if you can. So it's 3R plus 1. And then what would you do to each side, Adeline? Subtract 1. So 6 equals 3R. And if we divide by 3, R equals 2. Now we have the S's. S plus 5 and 2S plus 2. So S plus 5 has to equal 2S plus 2. So these are 2's and this is an S. That S looks like a 5S. Okay? Now, what do we do to both sides here, Cayman, to get S alone? Subtract S from each side. So 5 equals S plus 2. Then what do we do to each side, Braxton? Subtract 2. So S equals 3. Okay? If S equals 3, this is 8. And this is, Mr. Bierschbach wrote down the problem wrong. So it's S minus 2. So Braxton, if he knew that, would have said, well, you add 2 to get S equals 7. So 7 plus 5 is 12. 2 times 7 is 14 minus 2 is 12. If I wouldn't have checked my answer, I wouldn't have known it was wrong. So it's always good to check your answers. If you put in a 2, 4 times 2 is 8 plus 7 is 15. 7 times 2 is 14 plus 1 is 15. Opposite sides are congruent. All right. The converse of theorem 6.11. If the diagonals are bisecting each other, then we have a parallelogram. The only new thing we have today is this. If one pair of sides are both opposite, or one pair of opposite sides are both parallel and congruent, then it's a parallelogram. Now, this is what you can't have, and they'll try to trip you up on this. If this side is parallel and this side is congruent, does that make a parallelogram? And the answer is no, because it could be an isosceles trapezoid. Could be an isosceles trapezoid. So you can't say when you have one pair of opposite sides parallel and the other sides congruent, you'd have to know that the same side is both parallel and congruent, not two different sides. Okay? So for this, it says, what do we make a parallelogram here? Well, we got diagonals. They're bisecting each other, I hope. So AE is x plus 2. EC is 2x minus 2. BE is 2. And DE is x minus 2. What does the value of x have to be? Well, I just set BE equal ED to find it. BE 2 should be equal to x minus 2. What do we do to each side to solve this one, Oliver? Add 2. X equals 4. So if x is 4, this is 6. 2 times 4 is 8 minus 2. This is 6. 2 is there. 4 minus 2 is 2. 2 and 2. 6 and 6. Yep, they bisect each other. Yep, it's a parallelogram. Is this a parallelogram? Kind of looks like there's not quite enough information, but there actually is enough information. Braxton was right off the bat. Okay? 48 and 132 are what types of angles? Supplementary. If we have consecutive angles that are supplementary, they're same side interior angles, that makes this side parallel to this side. If these two sides are parallel and congruent, then yes, it is a parallelogram. Okay? Now, if this is 58 and 123 and 58, does that make a parallelogram? Is that going to be a parallelogram? We got some yeses, we got some nos. You were right the last time when you said yes, but this time you're wrong when you said yes. Does 123 and 58 add up to 180? No, that adds up to 181. Okay? So if you do add up all the angles, this one winds up to be 121. Okay? Because you have to have 360 degrees in a quadrilateral. Well, are opposite angles congruent? No. Are consecutive angles supplementary? No. So this one's a big, fat no. It's really close, but it's not a parallelogram. Okay. To be safe, when you have a platform that raises this monster truck up, the platforms have to be parallel to each other. In this case, are they going to be parallel to each other? Are 75 and 105 supplementary? Yes. So that makes this end parallel to this end. If this end's parallel to this end and they're both 6 feet, they're both parallel and congruent. If they're both parallel and congruent, does that make a parallelogram? Yes. So that makes this side parallel to this side. So yes, it is safe because you have a parallelogram. So ways to prove parallelograms. Opposite sides congruent makes parallelograms. One pair of opposite sides congruent and parallel, but it has to be the same sides. They're both congruent and parallel, makes a parallelogram. The diagonals bisect each other, that's a parallelogram. If consecutive angles are supplementary, that's a parallelogram. If opposite angles are congruent, then it's a parallelogram. So there's things are stacking up what you need to know in this chapter. Okay? There's going to be a lot to know by the end, especially when we get into rectangles and rhombuses. Okay? So you need to not only just try to get the answers right and let the computer help you get them right, but you need to understand the concepts while you're doing this. Okay? Need to understand the concepts. while we're going through these. All right, I will assign out the last assignment. You'll have a good half hour to work on it. So let's get to work on it, please.